Hi, and welcome to the fourth installment of the Cabinet Con on Season 1 of Small Town Justice. This episode is called Just One Sentence, and if that title doesn't give away the winner of last week's vote, it's probably because you didn't hear last week's episode. I'm your host, Kyle O'Donnell. Today is Tuesday, April 5th, 2022. Our next episode will air on Tuesday, April 12th, 2022. One quick note before we get back into it. Already in this case, it's turning into quite an affair. The next episode, episode 5, you'll want to be on board for that. I've already been approved by Robert Stoll's caseworker to speak with him in prison. I also, in this investigation, have already spoken with an anonymous police officer who chimed in on the case, and I've also spoken with cabinet companies about volunteering their time and materials to hopefully get some, justice, right? So get some cabinets in for some of Stoll's victims who had their kitchens and bathrooms destroyed. And last but not least, I actually also talked to a man who's allegedly been conned by Michael McKay for 7 figures. Here's a snippet of that.
As you can appreciate and imagine in these scenarios, one cannot be too cautious from the standpoint of who we are dealing with and their insanity. This process has matured me in a different sense in terms of humanity and what people do. Not all people, but more than you think or know or want to believe. Once you get done by these type of people, right, it fundamentally changes your psychology, your ability to reason at just deeper levels than, frankly, humans should have to imagine, let alone do.
You will want to hear the conclusion of this thing. This story transitions into a case where it was a simple podcast discussing a tragedy turned triumph into a documentary-worthy investigation. And in fact, my plans for the future of this story include going to Florida and getting my boots on the ground to chase this story wherever it leads. Trust me when I say that this story has taken off on my side. I still have tons of interviews to conclude the Robert Stoll case, but we're going to be moving right on into another investigation that involves Michael McKay. I don't want to say too much about that. Pretty crazy. So head over to legallyinsanefilms.com and click that button to join the fan club, get access to the full episodes, and if you're feeling like you want more access, $5 will buy you the Investigator level perk, where you're invited to live streams with the crew. You get voting powers. Those will continue throughout the episodes, access to the files that we ourselves have, the background checks, the stuff supplied to us by confidential informants, unreleased information, discounts on our films, freebies, bonus materials, just tons and tons of stuff. It's all very exciting. And you really have no idea how happy it makes the crew to see new members join our ranks. Their faces just light up to see the validation that we're actually creating content that you find valuable enough to donate your hard-earned money. So thanks so very much to all of you. Now, on to the legal stuff. To skip this intro, the quiz, the prize winners, the shout-outs, and the disclaimer, click ahead to about 6 minutes. Last week, you guys voted that you wanted me to reveal my interview with the attorneys, so that'll be coming up right here in this episode. Stay tuned, though, to the end of the show for next week's vote. It may come down to a couple of interesting interviews, so you'll definitely want to stick around for that. Last week's quiz winner is Bethany from Bozeman, who got herself a free sneak preview of our latest film, Big Trouble in Little Quartzsite. Thanks so much for listening, Bethany, and let us know what you think of the film when you're done. Shoot us an email. Let us know what you think of the film. Okay, so for this week's quiz, answer the following questions completely correctly and before next week's episode, and I'll reward you with free access to that same documentary. Here are the questions. In this episode, Hannah finally confirms how many people actually testified in court. So this question number 1 is, how many people does she say testified? Question number 2, Stoll was sentenced to 10 years in prison in addition to 25 years of probation, during which time he's ordered to repay his victims. What is the minimum sentence for a crime like this? Hannah does actually say, kind of later in this episode, what that is. What is the minimum sentence for a crime like this? And last one, Hannah stated that Stoll was shocked by the lofty sentence. I'm sure anybody would be if they were told they're going to spend 10 years behind bars. What did she say his verbal reaction was? And I'm not looking for a quote here. I'm just looking for the nature of the sentence that he stated to the judge. How does she paraphrase that? As always, to win, you must do 2 things. First is to email me the correct answers. thejusticepod@gmail.com. The second is to follow me on Twitter at Kyle O'Donnell with the hashtag smalltownjustice so that I know it's you. If you don't use Twitter, indicate that in your email. Remember not to post your answers on Twitter. Just follow and tweet that hashtag so that I get the update. And the third thing, and technically this one is optional, but we do need followers on our Facebook page, group, and private Web Sleuth group. You'll have to pass a test for the Web Sleuth group, but once you do, you'll get access to all kinds of extras. Check the show notes for all our links. I'll pick a few of the winners and announce them on our next episode. Okay, so today I'm talking to the prosecutor who convicted Robert Stoll. The young but battle-tested Hannah Nowak joins me today, along with her supervisor, Tom Williams of the Florida State Attorney's Office. I'm hoping to get into some of Stoll's alleged accomplices, but we'll just have to wait and see what they are able to tell me about that. I've been looking forward to this interview for quite a while. It was rescheduled due to their workload, but that's what prosecutors are. They're busy people. They're busy busting bad guys. So good for them and good for us. But I'm also hoping to dig into Stoll's disposition before he was convicted and, of course, after his sentencing. I'm thinking, that's probably as important to note for the victims as it was for my listeners. I'm speaking with a lot of victims lately, and they've all kind of given me their versions of the timeline of events as they understand and remember them. So I'm also in this conversation hoping to lock down some of the chronology of criminal activity from the attorney's perspective, since they pretty much are going to be presenting it to a judge, so they have to have their facts straight. So they're going to probably give me the most accurate information. I'm also interested in seeing how common these cases are. Maybe, find out how they ended up on their desks, because I don't really think they're terribly traditional, and whether that's a regular occurrence for them. So yeah, we're going to get a little bit further into this case. Enjoy. Let's just do some intros. Tell me who you are, and maybe talk about how you got into this line of work. Don't worry about like the intricacies of the case right now. Just, who are you? How'd you get into this line of work, and how'd you end up at the prosecutor's office? Stuff like that. Let's start with Hannah.
Oh, okay. Yes. So I never knew that I would be a lawyer. I'm dyslexic, and so I didn't think that would be an option for me. But being dyslexic, it made me, push forward even more so in wanting to learn how to read and wanting to dissect sentences to the extent of wanting to be a lawyer and use words as like the chess pieces on a chessboard. So I became a lawyer, and I was most interested in criminal law because of the trial aspect of it. I like being in trial the most, and you really have invaluable experience as a trial attorney as opposed to any other type of work as a prosecutor. And so I love this job because of that. And with regard to the type of public corruption, organized crime cases, we get exposed to all sorts of different legal issues that we ordinarily would not see if we were in prosecuting other types of cases. There's always new concepts, new legal issues that arise that makes it more fun. We get to research issues all the time.
Yeah. All right. Great answer. Tom?
I joke around sometimes and say that I became a lawyer by accident. There's a little bit of truth into that. I took a pre-law class as an elective in undergrad because it just worked with my schedule. I had no interest in it, but I ended up loving the course. And I ended up getting my first paying job was here at the state attorney's office when I was an intern in law school. And kind of the same way I took it because it was a paying job and didn't really have any interest in criminal law, but by the end of the internship I did. And I'm still here, 12, 13, 14 years later, however long it's been. So it is a very rewarding job. I've found a lot of reward and fluidity to it, the different challenges that come up. But I do enjoy being in the courtroom and the opportunities that this job gets to try cases and practice in front of juries and work on cases of a lot of public interest.
Very cool. Very cool. And speaking of time in the trenches, I hear, and don't take this as a slant, Hannah, but I hear you're a young gal. We haven't met, so I haven't been able to assess for myself. Is that true?
Yes. Yes, I've only been in the office for about 5 years out of school.
All right, cool. And so this is by no stretch of the imagination your first case or anything, but at the same time, relatively wet behind the ears.
Yes.
Okay. All right, fair enough, because that sets up another question that I'm going to get into here, and that is that to me, when I first heard this case, it was actually finished. Robert Stoll had been convicted and sentenced. So for me, I didn't really see a lot of detail there. I was like, oh, some guy ripped one of my friends off and, now he's in jail, yay. But it grew into a very complicated case as far as I can tell. There's a lot of witnesses. It spanned over 2 years. That's my impression. But, how complicated was it for you? How long did it take to actually prepare for this case?
So initially the complaints, let me kind of go back. The complaints came in between October of 2017 and March of 2019. And as they were coming in as individual complaints with the sheriff's office and our police department here, we did not see the pattern of behavior that necessitated an organized crime or organized fraud type of charge. And so all these complaints were being, cataloged, but it wasn't until the Florida Department of Agriculture and Consumer Complaints collected these complaints and found that there was a pattern of conduct. And then at that point, it came to our office, and we further investigated with our team, and we found 6 other victims through the Better Business Bureau and small claims court cases. And so there was a total of 16 victims. And when we got that case, we filed the information in November of 2019. And we further investigate even after that point to make sure that we have all the victims that we can find with regard to this type of organized scheme. And then he entered his plea in 2021, in February of 2021. And so it took some time. Certainly COVID was part of the delay in the proceedings.
Yeah.
But other than that, it was, just us making sure that our case was strong enough to, if we needed to go to trial, that we were prepared. But at this point, he entered a plea, so we did not need to prove the charges against him. We just highlighted certain aggravated factors in the sentencing hearing.
Okay. All right. That cleans it up a bit. That kind of makes it nice and, you guys are basically just doing damage control at that point, I'm sure. So, is that normally how these kinds of cases end up at your desk, or was this sort of it seems like a cumulative error. So how otherwise would this have ended up in your court had not been for the sort of coordinated efforts of other agencies?
So I think, and this is Tom now, the way that this came to us was actually not terribly uncommon. I would say at times as many as a third of our cases that we prosecute come just that way, piecemeal. Maybe a small portion of it could come from law enforcement, a small portion could come from a victim walking into our office off the street, and then maybe a portion of it could come from a civil attorney reaching out and saying, hey, I think that there's a criminal component here as well. So that was not uncommon for it to come in the way it did. Now, I will say that it has to be handled differently if it starts to develop that way, that we're getting pieces of it from multiple sources. It's very important for us to get our arms around the whole case as we see it at that time. And to that end, that really involves sort of coordinating investigations from different agencies like this case. And at that point, we really become, I guess, for lack of a better term, almost the lead investigator on a multi-agency investigation. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's great. In fact, I like the tie-in with the Department of Ag. Tell me what the extent of that was. I mean, I knew that the Department of Agriculture got involved, but maybe I'm not in Florida, so maybe I don't understand, because I understand that there's a lot of swampland. I understand that there's a lot of consumer efforts through the Department of Ag. It's a very agriculturally based state.
Yeah.
But, from my perspective in the understanding of investigations, you don't typically see a, Department of Ag getting involved in something like this. How did they get tied in, And how did you guys work together on it?
So the Department of Agriculture in Florida is a tremendous department. Like you said, I mean, and just by its name, you think that it would be limited to agriculture and the variety of issues that involve agriculture and its products. That being said, the Department of Agriculture in Florida covers a lot more than that. It's very surprising for most people to find out that the Department of Agriculture has jurisdiction over consumer fraud type activities, including some criminal action. And that is how they got involved in this. The Department of Agriculture has investigators assigned to this area who handle criminal matters like fraud that don't necessarily involve produce or oranges, right? And to that end, one of those investigators ended up receiving some of the initial complaints and working on them.
Yeah, and in fact, I think I spoke with some wonderful ladies at the the Better Business Bureau. I think that they were the ones who started seeing a pattern of these things and handed it over. And they were actually confused at the start of it who to hand it over to. I think I probably would be as well. So I found that interesting. But I was, definitely curious about your end of it. How much actual interaction did you guys have with them, or did they just hand you a case file and say good luck? I mean, what was that like?
We worked with the investigator on the case that took all of these complaints from the Sheriff's Office and Pensacola Police Department and accumulated it into this organized crime case. We worked with him to make sure that we had all the information that we needed. He helped us with interviewing the victims and further investigating after he provided us with his report showing us this pattern of conduct.
Right, okay.
And the Better Business Bureau, too. Like you said a minute ago, you mentioned that you had spoken with some of those people there. It's important to note that our office has an excellent relationship and has for many, many years with the Better Business Bureau. And it's really for that purpose. There are cases that we handle in this division that start off as just complaints against a business. They don't seem criminal on their face. It's just something's wrong. And we've had a lot of success working with the Better Business Bureau to find additional victims. And maybe if they don't ultimately become victims in every case, we can at least find additional information that can be helpful in a criminal case.
Well, that's kind of what they're saying as well. Even when they kind of look at something that's overwhelming, the impression that they gave me is that they actually created a task force, and the prosecutor's office sat in on, or somebody from the state. I may have my facts wrong. Actually went to a meeting with their task force to specifically train them on how to deal with things like this. Do you guys know anything about that? I'm waiting for a follow-up with them, but I figured if you guys knew anything about that, since you're kind of familiar with the work that you've done with them.
Well, I think probably I'm in a better position to answer that than Hannah. You may have to edit this. I'll try to say it carefully. I did attend, that's right. I attended a meeting that basically served as a cooperative training or meeting with the Better Business Bureau in the past to discuss this very issue on how to handle voluminous complaints about a business and what our office needs and what we look for in assessing it and determining whether or not it's a criminal complaint or we should include it in an existing criminal investigation.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's...
So as far as that being a task force or their terminology, I'm not in a position to speak to that. You may want to confirm that with them if I was the one that came and met with them, if that's what they're talking about. But I can confirm that, yes, I've met with them and I've made a presentation to them.
That's insanely cool, because they do get these sort of things all the time, and my very brief conversation with, I believe, the PR lady's name was Tammy there. I just love the accents from Florida. I was actually born in Florida, but my family only lived there for about a year before we moved away, so I never got the accent. We've gone back to visit and things like that. But anyway, she's got one of these hearty Southern accents, and she just went into this really cool story about having gone into this meeting and I think the BBB is ramping up efforts to stay more on top of stuff like that. So I think you actually did more than you think you did in inspiring them with whatever meeting you're referring to. So a little attaboy from them through me. So, so all right, let's get into the case a little more. Let's see. Did you guys interact with Mr. Stoll at all before the case? And if so, like, what was his disposition generally?
So we do not really have access to the criminal defendants unless their attorneys want us to speak with them or they're okay with us speaking with the criminal defendants. So in this case, I never spoke with Mr. Stoll or interacted with him. The first time I really heard him speak in person was during the sentencing hearing when he testified.
Did he have, and this is my own curiosity, it has nothing to do with the case or the victims or anything, but did he have a public defender or did he actually pay for an attorney, if you recall?
He was appointed counsel from the Office of Regional Conflict Counsel.
Okay. Because that would have, it's just kind of icing on the cake to use victims' money to maybe pay for an attorney. So, yeah, my own personal curiosity there. So, he admitted it, right? So, did he express like remorse or appear concern for his victims at any point that you were interacting with him?
So during the sentencing hearing, when he testified, certainly actually one of the victims was testifying, and he seemed to get a little emotional. And then he mentioned that I'm paraphrasing, I don't remember the direct quote that he made, but he said something to the effect of how he didn't know such a large group of people could be mad at him. And then he just expressed the fact that he was unable to keep up with the demands of his business. And so I just pointed out that he had a business, and then he conveniently changed the name after defrauding one of our victims, and then changed the business. So it was willfully changing the business name in order to hide the history of defrauding one of the victims, and then he would tell the witnesses, some of the victims who testified indicated that he would tell them that he had a bad reputation and not believe the reputation because it was just out of jealousy because his prices were so low. And so his demeanor during the sentencing hearing, while at times emotional, it did seem as though he was just making an excuse that he was unable to keep up with the demands of the business.
Well, that's a big part of that's a big part of court, is it not? I mean, just like you the judge has to sit there and figure out whether or not this person is acting and how well in the defense or support of their claims. So I've talked to a couple of the victims by now, and both of them told me. And I'll get into a question on this because I don't want to lead your answer, but it was packed with his victims, as you kind of mentioned. I mean, were there any prosecutorial? Trying to be careful with my words here. I don't want to say. I mean, you were intentional about what you did there. Obviously, that's what prosecutors do and defense attorneys do. But were there any moments in the court when the judge may have been impressed by the sheer number of people in the court there to act as witnesses or testify against him or victims, etc.?
So the court never relayed any impressions that she had with regard to that, other than saying that she could see the impact that it had on the community, which was our sole purpose, and trying to bring as many of the 16 victim homes as we could to the sentencing hearing to show the judge that this was personal to all of these individual people, and that it wasn't just business as it was for the defendant. We wanted her to see the impact that this had on the community and hear the stories of how it impacted each individual victim.
I hope you're enjoying this episode. So far in this interview, we've heard from Hannah and Tom about the pattern of organized fraud exhibited by Robert Stoll. Tom told us about the delicate nature of this case, I guess I'll call it, and other cases like it where there's a lot of information coming from different sources. And I'm sure that made things a bit tricky. So we're lucky that they got a conviction on this case. In the last half of this interview, we'll hear not only about what resources you have to report similar crimes like this being perpetrated in your community. But we'll also hear about what the prosecutors have to say about this new bedfellow on my horizon, Michael McKay. But before we get into that, I wanted to let you guys know that I'm offering $5 off my latest film to everybody that's listening to this podcast. If you haven't heard about it, it won its 8th accolade in the 2021 Film Festival season just this morning, and the season's only halfway through, so I'm very proud of that. If you haven't heard about it, the story is crazy. The second mayor is convicted of hiring a hitman to take out the first mayor, and that's just like the incorporation of the town. Over the following 30 years, witnesses detail a police chief on the take from the cartels, a town council embezzling millions in tax revenue and laundering it through the water treatment plant. A slew of activists are falsely arrested when they dare to ask questions. And that's not even the craziest part. The craziest part comes when a rogue cop leads 80% of the police department in a mutiny against their chief, a viral video of the false arrest of a woman for speaking at town hall, and the town itself, which is ultimately swarmed by the Oath Keepers, who march on town hall on a sweltering 117-degree day to smother the flames of corruption. It's without a doubt the most egregious small town injustice I've ever even heard of. And in fact, it's the inspiration for the very show that you're listening to right now. So head over to legallyinsanefilms.com, click Big Trouble in Little Quartzite, and enter the code SmallTownCrazy, all lowercase, and that code can also be found in the description. 25 cents out of every dollar that we make from this film goes to the Legally Insane Film Fund, which helps tell other stories of injustice in small town communities around our great nation. Now, back to the show.
So at the sentencing hearing, we had 8 people present, and those 8 people represented 6 of the 16 homes, and 7 of those people testified, and they shared stories that really went into the depth of how this affected their home and their family. We had victims that testified that they had to wash their dishes in the bathtub because the defendant kind of demolished their kitchen before he said he was going to put new cabinets in their kitchen, but he never put the new cabinets in there. He just left them at this disadvantage, and they were having to make kind of a makeshift kitchen in order to survive. And there were victims that did not come, but that wrote letters. We had 9 victims write letters to the court, and so they also shared their stories to the court, but they were not physically present during the hearing.
Yeah, let's take a turn there. The victims that I spoke with, they said that there were every single one I've spoken to, and everyone that they have referenced, and I know that's third person, but it makes sense that there's a pattern. They've mentioned that several members of Stoll's family, as well as kind of unrelated accomplices, were in collaboration with this scam. I mean, they mentioned a storefront, a box truck, several workers, as you say, that showed up to perform measurements or remove, cabinets and things. Did this initially or at any point throughout the thing strike you as kind of a ring of sorts, a conspiracy of many parties?
So that's difficult to answer. What I would say is that it is not uncommon for us to prosecute owners, or maybe if they're not even the owner on paper, they're the real operator of a small business. And it's also not uncommon for employees of that business to be performing the duties as directed. They're given their tasks and they go out and do their job. And our investigation determines that the owner or operator may have been knowingly and intentionally committing a crime, while the employees were just doing what they were directed to do without knowledge of where money was going and what promises were being made that were never intended to be kept. So that's always an issue in a small business case where you have other employees that don't know the full extent of the case, or there's not enough evidence to demonstrate that they know the full extent of the case.
So let me ask it a different way. Have you guys seen other cases like this crop up in the Panhandle area or regionally?
Maybe a little bit of clarity on what the answer is. Probably yes. What do you mean like this?
Also, contractor scams. I mean, a contractor scams is a pretty broad strokes question. I mean, that you get those all the time, I'm sure, all over the place. But is there something sort of strikingly similar to this, where someone's using a cabinet front and, you know, some of the other aspects of the case are the same, if similar?
I think that it's not uncommon for us to have handled in the past or prosecute cases where, whether it's a cabinet company or some other type of home repair contracting company, is ultimately investigated, or an owner and operator is prosecuted for this very thing. And that is not uncommon. I'm not in a position to say if that is common or that's unique to the Panhandle, the Florida Panhandle where we are, or not. But yes, we have prosecuted that in the past. We currently have cases like that, and Mr. Stoll's case, I think, was an excellent example of one of those types of cases.
Okay, great. So, taking off from that, there's another man named Michael McKay. Have you guys heard that name before in connection to the case?
So that was a name that of course, you had brought to me in the past. I'm reluctant, and Pam and I are reluctant to kind of comment on that specifically. I think it would be inappropriate for us to answer that kind of direct of a question at this point.
Okay. His name appears on the witness list of the docket there. Do you know who he was a witness for? Was he testifying against Stoll? Was he there to, in his defense?
So we have an obligation under a Florida Rule of Criminal Procedure to list as a witness anyone that we come across in any report or any type of document or any kind of oral statement that somebody could give us. And the idea is that anybody who may know anything about the case, the state attorney's office has a duty to disclose that to the other side to let them know, hey, this is somebody who may or may not be relevant to your defense. We're putting you on notice of it. To that end, it's not uncommon for us to list folks in our case as witnesses that we don't necessarily think that they're a star witness or a co-conspirator or something in between. So that's what I would say about any witness that we list that maybe is not necessarily called at a sentencing hearing down the road, or maybe not even a trial. Okay,
fair enough. And I'm gonna press one more issue on this, and you can answer it, not answer it, do whatever you want to do. I'm happy to edit it out, or if you need to tailor it to your potential other cases, that's fine with me too. I'm not. He has a history in Ohio that seems to be pretty on par with the type of fraud that he's facing here. And somehow he wound up with Stoll, along with kind of some of the witness statements I have that creates a connection between their scams. He was scheduled for a hearing yesterday, actually, but I think it's been delayed until like October or something like this for filing parole on an elderly victim of his or something like that. I was just wondering if you knew, or if you could comment on whether or not there's. How about this? How about I leave it open? With regard to this particular individual, is there any interest in continuing a case that might be related to Stoll or some offshoots of that or anything like that?
It's not uncommon for us to follow up a past criminal prosecution with a later prosecution of a related individual.
Sure.
Or even extra conduct that wasn't addressed in the prior case on the original individual. Mm-hmm. That's what I would say.
Okay, fair enough. How did the victims react? Well, let me back up a second and say, one of the victims told me that it seemed like he walked into court that day thinking he would just go home and this could be simply a response that they had that was colored by their emotional state. I fully understand that. But it seemed like he had a bit of a shocked reaction when he was convicted and sentenced, regardless if he pled. Maybe the severity of the sentencing or something like that. Did you guys get the impression that was the case? Like he was just sort of like, oh, well, I served my time. I guess I'm going to go home, and anything like that?
So I will say he scored prison. So the criminal guidelines in Florida for what he did and his prior record, which was minimal, he only had some misdemeanors in his past, as convictions at least. He scored prison, and so it was about 2 years of prison that he was supposed to serve under the legislator. But 10 years in prison is quite a lot, and so I think that the surprise that he had was due to the significant sentence, but it was probably higher than he expected to receive. He certainly made a comment after the judge sentenced him, kind of like, hold on, let's reevaluate this sort of comment. And so I think that while he must have expected to have gone to prison for a certain amount of time based off of the nature of this charge scoring prison, I guess based off of his demeanor, like you said, he must not have realized how long he was going to serve.
Yeah. When he realized he's going to get out in his 50s, that's probably when it hit him. Especially having been in prison already, that's got to be a bit of a hold on here. So that's, I don't know. Like, I'm trying not to assume myself on the reaction of the victims, but what was their reaction to that sentencing?
So there was kind of shock, I think, amongst the whole courtroom. I know that before the sentencing hearing, we kind of all mustered with the victims and explained what the process was going to be like in the courtroom and explained the possible outcomes that he could have. And a lot of them were concerned about restitution, and so the judge gave him a lengthy period of restitution to follow the prison sentence to make sure, or probationary period to make sure that he paid restitution to these victims.
Yeah.
And so I know that certainly, their needs in becoming whole financially should be met with the follow-up probationary period. But I know that the prison sentence is something that a lot of the victims did want. I was speaking with one of our paralegals who was up there, and she mentioned that they conveyed to her that they were happy, that they wanted him to go to prison. We were discussing the restitution during the sentencing hearing, and a lot of the victims were telling the paralegal in our office that they just wanted him to go to prison. So I believe that they were happy with the result. We did have some follow-up calls after the sentencing hearing indicating that they were pleased with the result.
And so that kind of plays into the next question. I'm assuming that they were happy with it, but in your estimation, did this case provide justice for the victims or for the community or both?
I believe it did. I think that 10 years in prison is a significant amount of time, and it should deter other people from behaving this way in the future.
Right.
And when they realize the severity of a sentence that they could have. And also, I think that the probationary period was lengthy enough to follow the prison sentence to allow the victims to become financially whole, or at least give the defendant the opportunity to make them financially whole.
Yeah. Awesome. Where is he imprisoned? Do you know?
I'm not sure.
Yeah.
We can, there is a Florida Department of Corrections website with, it's called an offender search tab, where you can type them in, of course, and it's, sometimes people will stay at one given prison for their whole sentence. Other times they move around every 2 or 3 years for a variety of reasons. And I mean, and Hannah can look it up right now and tell you where he is right now, but I will let you know that it's not uncommon for that to change, okay?
Yeah, fair enough.
She's looking it up right now. Go ahead and click on it. It looks like he's at what's called a, kind of like a reception center where inmates first go upon their sentence. And at that point, the Department of Corrections does some initial intake on the offender, a medical history, a criminal history, an assessment, that sort of thing, and they determine what's the best facility
Cool. Last question, and thanks so much for your time, by the way. If people know anything about this case and to perhaps ameliorate their worries of having a lengthy, unsuccessful attempt at getting information out there where it can do some good, how can they reach out to you, or perhaps maybe another appropriate channel for getting this information to the right people?
Yeah, that's a great question. Our office makes a continuing effort to work with all the different other agencies that can serve as basically intake valves for these kind of complaints, whether that's the Better Business Bureau, the Chamber of Commerce, the law enforcement agencies, whether it's the Department of Agriculture, the Sheriff's Office, the Police Department. And to that end, that is something that's ongoing to maintain those relationships. And we do try to promote our successes in this area. You know, we did a press release on this case, the Stoll case, to let the public know that we are in this business of prosecuting white-collar cases, non-traditional criminal defendants.
Right.
And to that end, we want to make sure that we communicate that if members of the public feel like they have been defrauded, there are multiple places to go. Traditional law enforcement is always a good starting point, but if for some reason that doesn't work out, the Department of Agriculture, the Better Business Bureau, the State Attorney's Office, ourselves, are all places that people should feel welcome to go to and bring those concerns to our attention. Thank you so much for your time and interest in this. And Hannah did an excellent job on this case. Kind of like you said at the beginning, it may surprise you. Even with 5 years of experience, she's practically senior staff around here, just because this is a lot of people's first job after they get out of law school, and then they go on to do other things. But I know what you mean there. Hannah did an excellent job with this case. I was very proud of the way she handled it. Our office was proud of the way she handled it. It was a team effort. It wasn't just Hannah. The support staff did an excellent job. Law enforcement did a great job. But this is a case that she can certainly be proud of.
Well, that's why I'm talking to you guys. So yeah, I would echo that. Not so much the in the fatherly way that you have. You guys clearly have a very good relationship there. But yeah, I certainly would expect, if I were you, to see a lot more of these successful type things coming out of that office. And in fact, if you guys have something you feel I should know about, something that's specifically civil rights minded, that can help the community here or in other regions of the state, absolutely, you can consider me a resource to reach out to and help push that mission of making sure these guys know that they're going to be faced with some adversarial prosecution should they break the rules.
Yeah, great. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, guys, take care of yourselves, and thanks so much again.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
That's all we have for this episode. Thanks so much for joining us. Okay, so for next week's vote, I'd like everyone to head over to my Twitter account, check out my Twitter feed at Kyle O'Donnell, and let me know which episode you'd like to hear next. Based on your previous votes, I've already reached out to the Better Business Bureau, other cabinet companies in the Pensacola area, and I've also called a ton of other witnesses. All of them, by the way, incredible interviews. You'll want to hear them all, but the list of the interviews that I've got also includes an undercover informant that I shall not name here, but I will play the anonymized video if you get it right. I'm not going to tell you which of those selections he appears in, but so you just have to go vote, and depending on who wins the vote, that's the one that gets played. He might be in the Better Business Bureau. He might be one of the victims. By the way, the Better Business Bureau has a victim, has an investigative body attached to it, right? He might also be one of the cabinet company employees. Who knows? In any case, head over there and vote. I want to know what you guys want to hear for that next episode. And by the way, since I'm already talking about it, here are a few snippets of what that next vote might mean. Okay, so first up is the confidential informant. Do you know anything about what might be ongoing? You don't have any...
No, I personally, I don't. The state, actually, the county investigator took it, and Albeit, it wasn't just a burglary or robbery investigator. They handed it over to the the agriculture guys because it was that large, but they were handling a lot of those big money cases. And he expressed something to that effect that the key player was much bigger than Stoll. Stoll's issue, in my opinion, it was just narcotics based.
That was a crazy conversation that you'll definitely want to hear. Next up is a snippet of what I ran into when I started to call the victims. Okay, so I just looked up, and he is a registered sex offender. I'm not sure I want to reach out to this one. Wow, what do I do about that? What do I do?
Sex offenders need cabinets too.
Yeah, that was awkward. Then I tried to call the jails to speak with Stoll, who's currently serving time in prison.
You have reached Escambia County Jail.
I got hung up on by the Escambia County Jail trying to find an inmate by the name of Robert Stoll.
You have reached the Santa Rosa County Sheriff's Office. County Sheriff's Office, Karen speaking. May I help you?
Hi, I was trying to confirm if you guys had an inmate there by the name of Robert James Stoll, S-T-O-L-L. Is that information that you would have?
Then, of course, I talked to the investigators at the Better Business Bureau. How did you feel about the victory that the prosecutor's office had in their win?
Well, we're always glad to see that the bad guys have been stopped. And quite honestly, it would have been enough for me to have them put out of business just so that they're not continuing to scam people. I was a little taken aback by the sentence. It stated that he could have gotten a minimum of 26 months, and the judge gave him 10 years with a 20-year probation. That is harsh.
Yes, sirree, Bob. Based on your next vote, it's going to get real interesting. So check out my Twitter feed for that vote and vote your heart out. Just a reminder, this is our last week of full episodes, right? Free votes, free live streams, and all the rest. Last week of all of that stuff. If you've enjoyed the story so far and you'd like to hear like the dramatic and crazy conclusion, the undercover people that I've got, it's so much crazier than we first started. I mean, this story has just evolved into something that's absolutely nuts. I'd like to keep going. Unfortunately, that takes money. So if you'd like to hear the conclusion of this story as well as more stories of injustice from around our great nation, head over to legallyinsanefilms.com and click that join the fan club button. Not to worry, we're cheap. For the cost of a small coffee, that's $3. You get all the full episodes, shout outs, a whole bunch of stuff. For the cost of a beer at a local pub, $5. You get to keep voting. You get access to the live streams. You get insider access, extended interviews, bonus materials, outtakes, all that stuff. That we'll just call that insider access and a whole lot more. That's the Investigator tier. And for $9, which is the Commander tier, that gets you free movies, extras, outtakes, bonuses, behind the scenes stuff. That one's more the film oriented stuff. The list is as long as it's long. It's super long. You'll want to be on board for that, rest assured. Thanks for listening to this episode of Small Town Justice. This has been an absolute pleasure and a production of Legally Insane Films, LLC. All rights are reserved, so don't get any funny ideas of pulling a Stoll on me. Until next time, my good brethren and sistren, go legally into the night, but don't go insane.